I've read a really beautiful book that I'm sharing with you today called The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life by Kamla Kapur. It's a book that touched me deeply for many reasons. She is from India. She's from the Sikh tradition that I was reared in. So much of what she wrote, I felt like were parts of my own life that my heart just opened up in those places. Some of those thoughts that come in, some of the reconciliation that you have to have with parents and family, but then the questions, the beauty of the words, her writing. It's something sure to touch you deeply, where you will find yourself written within the pages of her words. She says, to some extent, the perspective of old age as privilege is a natural evolution. We enter a different dimension and experience of life with the passage of time. Our views mature, keeping pace with our circumstances. Many studies have shown that people in their dusking years are happier than ever, that nothing is taken away, only given. We now and know accept who we are, grow wiser, give gratitude for our lives as they have unfolded, become content with our lot in life, and as her 90-year-old friend Gillian Hensley said, my whole life has been a privilege. The downsides of aging together with the gifts bestowed must be incorporated into the vision of privilege to make it whole. Today we are discussing that privilege of aging, and I cannot think of a wiser, more beautiful voice to share this message in the way that she has. I'd like to welcome Kamla Kapur to 1111 Talk Radio. Welcome, Kamla.
Thank you, Simran, for having me. I look forward to our conversation, and thank you so much for loving my book, because that's what one wants. You're right to share yourself and your experiences with others, and hopefully there's a sort of empathy and sympathy with the reader that brings you close and helps you to share those parts of yourself that you don't normally share while you're just conversing with people. So I'm very happy to have written this book. And writing is not just a record of things, it is an archaeological tool to dig deeply into yourself and to discover solutions and insights through writing. So I'm big on writing.
Well, it comes across beautifully through this book. And I see this kind of as a hybrid because it's definitely a memoir in which you share your life and many poignant parts of that life. But yet at the same time, I think it takes the reader into these places of really looking at the privilege of aging and how to do that in a way that I'll use your words of that are kind, that soften, that become more gentle. Can you talk a little bit about how it was for you to go back and do this archaeological dig? If it was something that was more of a reflective experience, or did you find that you really were having to still, even at this stage, do a lot of healing?
Well, I think that it's always important to dig deep, and I do it practically every day or every other day. I journal, and with my journal, there are no holds barred. It's like speaking, it's my soul speaking, my concerns that are speaking, what is troubling me right now, where am I at my life right now. And it's um, it's both um, the joy of where the words are taking you, and also the hard work of looking at yourself and seeing where you go wrong. Because I think that one of the things most of us don't do, because we are so defended by our ego, and and which is, by the way, a natural thing. The ego does need to defend us, and so I'm not, knocking the ego, but the ego also defends us from the truth of ourselves. And whenever you find you have encountered such a moment, I think you have to stop and just go into it, analyze it, parse it, and see what lessons and what gifts there are for you in that archaeological dig. So it's both. It's um, I can see that in retrospect that the book is divided. Not really divided. That's not a really good word, but it has two strands, and one of them is definitely memoir, goes back and to the moment and forward into the future. And it's also a series of essays on topics that really engaged me. Like, I think that it's really important as you age to recognize and acknowledge where you're heading. And where we are heading is towards, the event horizon beyond which we disappear into we don't know what. Um, and it's important to face your death so that you can live your life more fully. And it's also important because once you have faced your fears and overcome them through parsing yourself, through what I did was I read a lot about people who died happily, Socrates amongst them. And so I want to have role models of people who went to their death joyously, because that is how I want to go. And um, that is how I want to live my life in the light of death. And it makes it sharper, my life sharper, more focused, and makes me kinder to the people who are in my life because I know that we are not going to be together for an extended amount of time. It's like you talked about time, Simran, where before you know it, time has caught up with you. It's really a dream, and we, as Shakespeare says, we are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded by a sleep. So, to remember both the reality of this life and acknowledge the reality of this life, and also see it as a dream, because seeing it as a dream detaches you from your troublesome attachments that give you trouble in the mind. So that's how I went about writing this book, and I'm very grateful that the universe allowed this to flow out of me. It wasn't a struggle, although writing you always face struggles during parts of it. But one of the wonderful gifts I've gotten out of this book is a confrontation and with death and love for death. Because unless you love the inevitable, you're always going to be fighting and struggling with it. And that's not going to make you a happy camper. That's only going to keep you troubled. So that was one of the gifts. Of course, there are many, many more.
I'd
But
like to I'd like to discuss that point because in the beginning of the book you say life as privilege is a focus, a perspective. And I love how you've framed that with what you've just said. I think that there are many individuals that as they age unknowingly become harder, bitter. They get caught up in their ailments or the disintegration or illnesses that take over. Perhaps they experience loss and regret. And so that approach to joyfully embrace, life because you're facing death is a completely different outlook and then creates the idea of privilege in aging as opposed to dreading aging or complaining about aging or, you know, getting caught up in what the body is naturally going to do, which is start to shift and change as we age. Talk a little bit about how you deal with the mundane portions of life that are parts of aging and moving toward that eternity versus really keeping that focus. How do you do that? And what do you do with the other part?
you know, the beacon of my life, my desire that propels me during my old age is a promise to myself that I want to be a happy old lady and not a crotchety old one, you know, which involves going through your crotchety parts because all of us have them. And we are all humans. And when we suffer, we tend to not be happy. We tend to complain and we tend to regret what's happening to us. And once we fall into that pit, then it's very hard to pull yourself out. So it's a daily practice. It's an hourly practice of self-reflection. Whenever I become aware that I'm not feeling as good as I want to feel, I sit down either with my journal or just with myself and ask myself what is going on, and ask myself, is this the direction you want to go in? And the answer is no. I do not want to go down the dark lane. I Because it is a slippery slope that's going to take you into a pit that's going to be very difficult to get out of. So the sooner you recognize that something is not quite right with you, and we all have this sense, there isn't there aren't people unless they're really hardened and defensive who don't have the sense that this is not a good place to be. And it's very important to acknowledge that. And then you can shift your focus to um, I gratitude definitely is one way. For example, I've been very sick with many autoimmune diseases, and and my life has been curtailed. I haven't been able to walk very well, or do my ordinary chores, wear my clothes, for example, without taking half an hour to do them. So I realized that one of the things I have to do is I have to go slowly, because going slowly gives you the patience to deal with whatever you need to deal with. And you also have to, when you sit down and have a conversation with yourself, you ask yourself, what other way can I go if I don't want to go down the dark lane? And then you have to have a lot of techniques and tools, which I talk about in the book, that can help you pull out of that. And you have to focus on that which is right. For example, I kept saying to myself, hey, I can at least walk down the stairs, even though I do it slowly. But I could really be at a place where I wouldn't even be able to do that. So we have to learn how to count the right things instead of the wrong things. I heard about a little story in a book about a woman in India was asked how many children she has, and she says, "I have one son." And so the interviewer asked her, "And you only have one son?" She says, "Well, I have two daughters, but they don't count." you know because in India it's like the sun is the thing. And so she'd obviously forgotten how to count, and these daughters are the ones that are going to come to her aid when she needs it the most. So she wasn't focusing right. And if you focus on all the things that are positive in your life, that are working in your life, then I think you move more towards gratitude and happiness. Because ingratitude is the worst kind of unhappiness. And happiness, is dependent upon gratitude because you're counting all the things in your life that are going right. And focusing on them is the way to increase them, is to expand them instead of constrict around everything that's wrong.
The mind can take us in one of two directions, and so we really do have to harness that mind in the way that you're talking about to be able to look at life and look at our experiences in the reality that they are, but that they are not a jail sentence. There's always another way out. And you talk about in the book developing new disciplines and rhythms to your day as you age. And I think that that's one area that sometimes people don't realize has to take place, particularly as they leave a career, they retire, their focus moves away from what they saw as their value or as their purpose in life. So often there are individuals that achieve a sense of hopelessness because they are no longer the identity that they used to be. Can you talk a little bit about establishing new rhythms and how we have to allow those old identities to die and allow the new ones, perhaps dormant in us, to rise up?
Well, you brought up a very important point because I have known at least two people in my life who retired and soon thereafter died. Because one of the reasons was because they did not develop a newer tempo to their lives. They're still going by the old habits of speeding and doing this and doing that, and that obscures your true purpose because all you're doing is pouring yourself into your job, and your job is not everything. There is something greater than your job. And I deplore the fact that people who are retiring don't have a template to go by. And I've often thought, I'm 76 years old recently, and I've often wanted to write a little guidebook for people who are retiring, because you have to start your preparation before that and to be aware of what obstacles you're going to face, obstacles of relevance and purpose. And what do you do with your time? You had something to do with your time earlier on. You got up, you showered, you wore your clothes, you got in the car, and you went somewhere, and you came back and you had your routine, and that's it. But I was I was reading a book by Rollo May yesterday, and he talked about there was in the 60s there was a bus driver in Manhattan who just grew very, very tired of his job, and of doing the same thing, making the same stops, the same places. So one day he just took off. He took his bus and he went on a little vacation. And obviously, in normal circumstances, he would have been fired. But when he came back after 2 or 3 days, the people in Manhattan were lining the streets to welcome him back and appreciate him for doing something different, you know. And he had such a backing for that the company didn't fire him. So we all wanting spontaneity in our lives, the spontaneity that you get once you retire from your job. But to get to that spontaneity, you have to go through certain disciplines. Um, and I am really big on disciplines around health, both mental and physical. Since my illness and my rehabilitation, I have promised myself that for 1 hour a day, I'm going to pay attention to my body. I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to do cycling, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to do some weights, whatever takes an hour. So that, and the other discipline, of course, to keep your mental keel straight is I do it through journaling, but you can do it through journaling as well. You just, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to write fragments or run on sentences. Don't care about grammar. Just pour yourself out in the journal, and you will, when you look back on it, you'll find directions that you can go. So, but this is a huge question, Simran, of people who retire and don't know what to do with themselves. And some of the skills that I mention in the book, I think, come in very handy. And I went through a phase that way. It's not like, I'm so enlightened that I don't go through my dark periods. I do go through dark periods, but I think that my dark periods always, if I embrace them, offer me a gift. I learn so much from my dark periods. And most of all, what I learn is how to deal with them and how to come out of them. And what gift did they offer me? Suffering teaches us a great deal. One of the things it teaches us is we don't want to suffer. So, what can you do to not suffer? Some people are addicted to their suffering. They replay the same scenes in their minds over and over and over again and get stuck in it. And that, I think, is a very destructive direction to go in. You first have to believe that there is something you can do about it, and then do something about it. Whether it's reading a book that tells you, how to control your mind. I'm writing a book right now about just surrounded by Guru Nanak's phrase, conquer your mind and you conquer the world. And all the subjects in the book are under that topic. So my endeavor is to share what I learn with people, and hopefully I'm not being too proudful when I say that that is my desire. I would like to help people turn towards the light, while acknowledging the dark, while acknowledging the difficult parts.
My guest today is Kamla K. Kapur, and we are discussing The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life. In that book, she says, I take nothing for granted and am grateful for what I have experienced instead of wanting more and more of it. I surrender my life to the force that gives and takes away. I huddle in silence in the center of no hope. It is a good, calm, salubrious place in which I count my blessings. I move my finger on the keyboard and am grateful I can move my finger. I see and feel the rays of the sun hitting my face and give thanks. My blessings are infinite. I move through my day aware of seemingly infinite abundance. It is not gratitude for life, as opposed to death, although it is definitely that as well. In surrendering, I will be carried like a child in the mother's embrace through the darkness into the light, described by all who have returned to tell. This is from the book, again, The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life by Kamla Kapur. She's a well-known Indian poet, author, and playwright. Her previous works include Ganesha Goes to Lunch and Rumi's Tales from the Silk Road. She's also written a beautiful book called The Singing Guru, Legends and Adventures of Guru Nanak, the First Sikh. Kapur was on the faculty of Grossmont College in San Diego, California for 18 years and taught courses in playwriting, poetry, creative nonfiction, fiction, mythology, Shakespeare, and women's literature. She and her husband, Payson Stevens, divide their time between Kulu Valley in the Indian Himalayas and Southern California. And she has been the author of this new book, The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life. I invite you to explore her website, Discovery. She examines shadows, fears, anxieties, and regrets, decluttering her mind of disempowering thoughts and reframing and co-creating her reality with the powerful tool of unconditional self-love. Drawing on stories from a variety of cultural traditions, she demonstrates the power of self-examination, vigilance, and intentionality to have a successful old age. You can find out more about this book, The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life, and her other books if you'll go to her website. That's kamlakapur.com. You can find that link in the bio description. Within the book, she says to understand freedom, and she speaks only of personal freedom, we have to understand what keeps us from being free. Most of our tyrants are within us. We are captives of our shadows, what the old world called vices and sins. Pride keeps us from the most valuable experiences of love, anger, envy, greed, lust, unchecked despair, and depression are their own hells. Inner demons are insidious, invisible thoughts, and unconscious behaviors that misguide us into suffering. Some really rich and beautiful passages in this book. And I think that as you move through it, you will venture into some of the questions that might be plaguing you on a deep level, such as who am I when I no longer am the person that I was? What can I be? What sort of old person do I want to be, and how do I get there? So get your copy of Kamla's book, The Privilege of Aging. Welcome back, Kamla. I want to talk a little bit about slowing down. I find, as I look back, I'm in my mid-50s at this point, and as I look back at life and I watch others, I've realized that we move through these stages in our lives. In our 20s, we are trying to become something. We're open-eyed and we're adventurous and moving towards things. In our 30s, we're starting to settle down and we're starting to ask the question of who am I? And we're starting to notice that things aren't quite what they seem. And in our 40s, sometimes that's when we crash and burn, or other times certain parts of our lives start to fall apart and we start to really look at, okay, what's my part in this? And I've found in my 50s, I don't know where everyone else is in their 50s, but it's almost as a place of starting over. Like, okay, well, that seems like another lifetime. It's time to start again. And so I'm
Yes.
wondering how you see these different age stages and how slowing down is a part of that process that is so necessary on many different levels for each of us to embrace a little bit more, along with aloneness. I find that that's a very powerful tool that we must embrace more of as well.
Yes, going slowly actually is a different experience of life. When you're hurrying through life, you are not being present. And by going slowly, you are much more present to yourself, to the things around you, to the beauty around you, to the uh, to the wonderful changes that are happening within your body and your mind. So slowing down is, I think, slowing down has actually solved most of my problems as I age, because slowing down gives you a lot of patience, and patience is what you need with yourself, first of all, and with the circumstances of your lives. And if you're going slowly and uh, reflecting on what is going on, then you can find handles for all these different um, uh, problems that you're having. On a very literal level, slowing down ensures that you're not taking tumbles every once in a while and breaking something in your body. It helps you to be more cautious and careful. And it is, I would say, if it is the single most important thing for us to do as we age, because uh, we want to experience life in a different way, not the way that we have lived it before, which has been on tracks. We are not. We have not deviated from the track of our life, and by just doing the same thing over and over again, you are sabotaging uh, knowing yourself. You're just being mechanical. So I know there was another part of that question, Simran, but
Yes, it had to do with spending time alone. I have found, particularly in the last decade, because it's so much of what you wrote in your book, I actually have experienced a lot of that in the last 10 years. And that slowing down, that becoming more present, and particularly allowing times of pure aloneness, extended periods of those times, I have found extremely valuable in knowing oneself, but also in terms of direction. Talk a little bit about the time alone as into the 60s and the 70s, how important that is.
well, being alone has, its yin and yang aspects. Sometimes being alone, it just gets lonely. And that is an epidemic throughout the world, actually. People, as they get older, get lonely. And I have found that to you get lonely because you have not uh, kept in mind all the connections that you do have that you can reach out to. And what I find helps me the most when I'm lonely is resting, because I get lonely and depressed and anxious when I'm not rested. Going slowly and resting is two sides of the same coin. And if there's one thing I'm really proud of myself for is is resting. Now, before I had these illnesses, I was still, on this power trip where I got to get this done and that done and that done, and and I was making myself sick. And my sickness I saw as a healing, because sometimes you fall sick when um, something in your body, in your mind, is off balance. And sickness slows you down enough to recognize what are the things you need in order to make your life a happier one. Now, the yang side of loneliness is this wonderful, wonderful experience of one's solitude. It I am the happiest when I'm solitary, not when I'm with people, not when I'm making trips outside the house and running for this and running for that. I am the happiest when I slip into the skin of my solitude and am perfectly content and happy with who I am. So one has to sort of see there is a thin line between loneliness and solitude. And we know when we are lonely and when we are just simply enjoying our own company, we are
Mm-hmm.
just happy to just be in our skin and being with ourselves because we love ourselves, and we have to love ourselves more and more and more as we age and as we begin to our bodies begin to decay and our minds begin to disintegrate. So,
Do you
um,
think that that is the invitation that life gives us as we age, that ultimately it is about self-love and the presence to ourselves in a way that we could not be when we were younger?
you know, loving oneself again is another of those things, like slowing down and slipping into your solitude, which cures everything. Because I have found with minute, absolutely minute um, focus on my states of mind, that whenever I'm not happy, somewhere I'm not loving myself. I'm comparing myself to others, or I am thinking I'm not worthy of something, or I'm not lovable enough, or there's something wrong with me. Blah 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 blah. Endless negative self-talk, and but as soon as you discover that that's what you're doing, you're spinning in your own turmoil, that is when to interrupt this tendency and replace it with, you are fine, you are okay, you are lovable, and I love myself more than I love anybody else in the world, because who else is going to love me as much as I can love myself?
You also write in the book that aging is teaching me to trust instead of fear, that there's something that's very magical about trusting and committing to oneself that's different now than perhaps before.
Yes, trusting yourself and trusting the universe is a huge part of being calm and being happy and being joyous. Because when you're not trusting, you are thinking, oh, the universe is going to give you a tumble, it's going to knock you on your head, or, it's terrible out there. I haven't had a good past, and I'm not going to have a good future, and I'm not having a good present. That is mistrust that is doing nothing but destroying your peace of mind. It is negative, it is self destructive, and it must be stopped at all costs. And it must be replaced by positive affirmations about yourself and about loving yourself. You know, I sometimes I just get into the bed and I just hug myself and love myself for 10 minutes. It feels so good.
So many people are afraid of death, and you've had experiences that you share in the book where you really had to face death head on earlier on. You dealt with someone in a suicide. You had to grieve through that process. And I think that grief is one of those areas that a lot of people push against. They don't want to feel the pain of that grief, or there is this grand fear of loss of the one that they're with. Can you speak to that part of the experience and how we hold grief in that sacred way in which it's meant to come and be the messenger, but yet how we also then move on from that grief.
Yes, when I went through the suicide of my late husband, like always, my way to deal with it is by writing about it. And I wrote poetry. I wrote a whole book of poems that's called The Gift of Grief. And by writing these poems, I saw the gifts in the grief, that you have to embrace your grief. You have to go through it. The only way out is through, as Robert Frost says. You have to embrace even the toughest adversity of your life. It's like Shakespeare says, sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the ugly toad, wears yet a precious jewel in its head. So all our suffering and all our adversity and all our grief is giving us something and giving us a gift. And the gift here is embracing your death and the death of people close to you instead of fearing it. Because when you fear it, when you fear something, you can't love because your heart is just full of fear. You can only love something or someone when you are aware that the relationship is not going to last forever, and that you have to be extremely kind to each other. And that is a lesson I learned from the suicide of my late husband. It has taught me how to love better, to love more, not take it for granted, because uh, anything can happen at any time. Absolutely anything can happen at any time. And preparation for it, knowing it and acknowledging it, is half the battle won. Because fear will only take us down rabbit holes. It'll keep us from life and it'll keep us from love.
That was very profoundly written in the book, too, about how we keep ourselves from love. I really appreciated that part. And you also went into some of the subtleties that we can carry. In my trilogy, in my third book on humanity, I talk a lot about the very subtle energies that people often don't become aware that they're carrying, and they are things like regret and resentment, and envy is one of those. And you spoke about envy. You said envy is also a failure to embrace my life as it is, as it has been, and will no doubt continue to be till death ends it all. Accept your life as it is. Envy can be one of those insidious things that we aren't even necessarily aware of, because we can just see something that's happening for someone else and not touch on the fact that perhaps that's something that we're longing for, and even that is a place of envy. Can you talk a little bit about how to work with envy and any realizations around that you had?
Envy poisons your life because it makes you not accept where you are at in your life. And envy is always based on comparison. He or she has more than me by way of money or success or fame or, connections or, um, uh, you know, um, any of those things that human beings want. And it is it absolutely destroys your life because it makes you question your own life, it makes you question yourself, and it makes you dislike yourself because you are not where others are. And this is, I think, if I were to point to one feeling that absolutely negates us, it is envy. And like Emerson says, envy is ignorance and imitation suicide. What does that mean? If you are envying somebody, you are ignorant of your own life. You're ignorant that our own lives have their own trajectories and their own destinies. And if you question that, you're lost. And imitation is suicide. Now, in our society, everybody's imitating everybody else. And by losing themselves, they lose themselves if they imitate other people. I want to get this and I want to get that. I want to get what she has and I want to get what he has. And that it will absolutely ruin your life. And it is something you have to become aware of. Again, without self reflection, without a focus on yourself and your inner processes, you are not going to find out that this current suffering that you're uh, uh, undergoing is because you are in an acute affliction of envy. So we have to watch it, and uh, we have to watch it, and we have to affirm our own life, our own character, our own direction and destiny. Um, otherwise, uh, otherwise, you're sabotaging your life and ruining it.
There's so many other places that we could go in this book to discuss everything from appearances as we age to how to settle more at home inside of ourselves, but we have run out of time. And so I want to urge you to get your copy of The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life. What sort of old person do you want to be? And how should you get there? How do you want to live from day to day, from hour to hour? How do you attain the psychological health? What will you do with your remaining time? What is your purpose now, in the world and for life? Every stage of our lives demands a new set of eyes that are not looking at the present through the filters of the past habits and definitions. Kamla Kapur says that we need to cleanse and upgrade the lenses of the mind and look at constantly shifting circumstances of the body-mind. The lens is the lens of perspective of the mind, the wizard that can make us wither or bloom. Again, this is from The Privilege of Aging, Savoring the Fullness of Life from Kamla K. Kapur. Go to kamlakapur.com to find out more about her and other books that she has written, which include Ganesha Goes to Lunch, Rumi's Tales from the Silk Road, and also The Singing Guru, among other things. Thank you, Kamla, for being on 1111 Talk Radio. It has been a delight. Until next week, I am Simran, in love, of love, with love, and as love. Be well.